let's see. How do I do this without spoilers? Spider-Man No Way Home is a movie that I watched. It was shot on a camera, and all of its scenes were edited and arranged into a carefully crafted narrative. Spider-Man / Peter Parker is played by Tom Holland, and you know what, fuck this.
Differently.
Spider-Man No Way Home is the 1000th release from Marvel Studios this year, and the third and probably final entry into the Home trilogy of the Spider-Man movies taking place within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. There was a lot of hype around this movie, and there was a lot of hype for several reasons, and because of those reasons, I have to dance around a lot of the details of this movie. Quite frankly, this didn't even feel like watching a movie to me. It felt like watching a PowerPoint presentation that exists to remind me of older, better movies from my childhood. So, suffice it to say, I will say up front, Spider-Man No Way Home felt empty to me, and I don't get enjoyment out of saying that. I went into this movie very, very excited for all of the possibilities, and I came away from the movie thinking this movie had absolutely no heart whatsoever, and it was a very disappointing experience despite the theater being electric. Spider-Man No Way Home follows the basic plot that the trailer introduces us to, but it is decidedly more complex and personal than the trailers would lead you to believe, and it is for that reason that I actually think this story is, quite frankly, actually a good Spider-Man story. I think it's a more traditional take on the character of Spider-Man than the previous two Spider-Man movies, Homecoming and Far From Home, which to me felt nothing like the character of Peter Parker and nothing like the character of Spider-Man that I grew up with. So I can say that Spider-Man No Way Home definitely gets some bonus points with me because it definitely felt like a Spider-Man story, but only in the second half. This movie struggles mightily, especially in the first half, because there is so much setup, exposition, and quite frankly, juggling of many, many characters in this movie that has to take place. And because of all of this that is going on, the movie feels somehow too long, but also it doesn't feel long enough. There are certain points throughout the movie where it feels extremely rushed, and you find yourself wishing that you got to spend more time with certain characters. So Spider-Man No Way Home finds itself in a very unique and unfortunate predicament for this reason. But I will say that Peter's primary motivation for asking Doctor Strange to wipe the memory of the public knowledge that Peter Parker is Spider-Man is decidedly more selfless than I thought it would be, and it is for this reason that I think the inciting incident of this movie is actually a pretty compelling one, because for once Tom Holland's Peter Parker is allowed to be Spider-Man. He is allowed to be selfless. He is portrayed as an impoverished, down on his luck, young adult, which is something that we have not seen from this Spider-Man at all until this point. And I do give this movie props for addressing almost every single issue I have with MCU Spidey. However, I cannot let go of the fact that this movie just feels empty to me. Despite all of the spectacle, despite all of the fan service, something about this movie feels lacking to me. And the reason I say this is because so much of the first half, where Peter Parker comes into contact with the villains from the Sam Raimi trilogy or the villains from the Andrew Garfield duology, a lot of this is filled with so many self-referential jokes to earlier Spider-Man films. A lot of it is there to serve the meta-narrative of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and there are a lot of tongue-in-cheek jabs at earlier Spider-Man films for taking themselves too seriously. And a lot of this just felt extremely weird and off-putting to me, because it almost seems like this Spider-Man movie, and by extension the Marvel Cinematic Universe as a whole, is afraid to have these characters engage with real drama, because so much of this movie felt like, at times, a parody of the Spider-Man franchise. And I don't mean a parody in the traditional sense, but it almost felt like a Spider-Man movie that was actively saying, not another Spider-Man movie. And that feels very weird, because not only does it take jabs at previous Spider-Man movies, but it also has these little lines of dialogue that says, well, this is actually the best Spider-Man because, well, he fought with the Avengers, because he went to space, because he fought Thanos. And all of these little things that are sprinkled throughout the movie just feel weird, and it leaves the movie with a sense of no real direction, because it can't seem to find any real footing between nostalgia and telling the story that it was trying to tell. However, I do think that the movie did a decent enough job with paying respect to the old villains, primarily Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin and Alfred Molina's Dr. Octopus, and also introducing them into the narrative of this film. I do think the movie did a decent enough job of that, because that was one of my biggest concerns going into this movie, is that they would sort of undo the character arcs that took place in the Sam Raimi films and even in the Mark Webb Spider-Man movies. But that wasn't the case. This movie managed to pay respect to the character arcs that happened, while also giving an explanation of why the plot of this movie is unfolding the way it is. So, one of my biggest concerns for this movie was allayed, and I'm glad to say that, but at the same time, so much of it definitely felt like back-patting fan service, and I just couldn't help but shake the feeling that this movie should feel like this monumental moment in pop culture. But it just didn't. And I found myself really struggling with the fact that you have all of these iconic Spider-Man villains on screen at once, and somehow feels anticlimactic. Nobody knows how to neuter classic iconography more than Marvel. Because there is a scene where you have the Sinister Six sit in the living room of a postmodern condominium. I mean, what is that? You know, and I'm not saying this because I'm looking for excuses to put the movie down. I just genuinely don't understand that decision. So from this point on, we are going to be discussing spoilers. So this is your one and only warning, because quite frankly, I don't think spoilers matter, and I'm tired of this culture that insists that it ruins the entire experience of a movie if you know anything at all about it before you actually watch it. There's been research done on this. Spoilers actually make you enjoy stories more. But I digress. So, unsurprisingly, the speculation was correct in that both Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man make an appearance in this movie, and these two characters are the only reason I liked this movie. There is a lot to like in this movie, and almost every single bit of what I liked in this film comes from either Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, or the villains from their respective films. And one of the big issues I have with Spider-Man No Way Home is that even when it does deliver hard-hitting emotional scenes, this movie can't help but undermine it with a joke. And I found myself growing increasingly frustrated by this, because you would have these real, genuine scenes taking place between Peter and these other Spider-Men, but the movie can't help itself. The screenwriters couldn't help themselves. They take away all the air out of the scene just for a cheap quip. And look, this was my personal issue with the movie. Most of the people in the theater that I was in at the showing I went to was over the moon for this movie. They loved every single bit. They laughed at every dumb joke. They had a blast throughout. In fact, I don't think it's a stretch to say some of the people in my theater probably enjoyed this movie more than I've enjoyed anything in my life. And that is not hyperbole, because people got out of their seats, screamed, cheered, clapped, and whistled when Tobey Maguire showed up on screen. And I'm not gonna lie, so did I. I cheered, I clapped, but his presence in the movie did not absolve the movie of all of its sins. And one thing I can say is I just cannot understand why Marvel wants to kill the momentum of a scene or a narrative just because they're afraid to go to any place that might even be remotely uncomfortable. I don't understand this continued hesitation to have these characters have any sense of honesty or genuine human emotion, which doesn't just include joy and laughter. As I said, the movie is not without its good qualities. I didn't hate this movie, but I didn't love it either. But the things that I did like, I found myself really, really liking. And I will say, Andrew Garfield in this movie was absolutely fantastic. I am so happy for him, because he finally got closure on his portrayal of the character. And it's very clear with Garfield's performance in this movie that he is not only a fantastic actor, but he was a great Spider-Man that wasn't given a fair shot because he was really screwed over by poor writing and poor execution in the Mark Webb films. Andrew Garfield is a good Spider-Man, and he's better than Tom Holland. Tobey Maguire, another one. Every single scene he was in, my eyes were glued to the screen because he brought that sense of sincerity to the screen, that beautiful sense of genuine human connection that he had in the original Raimi trilogy was right here in this movie, and I honestly couldn't even believe it. I admit, I got swept up in the fan service of it. Tobey Maguire just being on the screen almost made me tear up a little bit because it was that emotional. but he brings every ounce of his portrayal of Peter Parker into this movie, and it is so moving, it's so beautiful, so genuine, that it really highlights that the other moments of this movie don't do that. And it shows the stark difference between Raimi's Spider-Man and the MCU Spider-Man. And to me, the difference in quality is night and day. And I couldn't let go of that thought either. There were moments in this movie that genuinely moved me. Almost everything that involved Tobey and Andrew's Spider-Man worked for me. There was a moment where Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man was talking to Electro, and he said, "You were never nobody, Max. I never thought you were nobody," which harkened back to Electro's character arc in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, and there was just something about it that actually landed for me. There was a moment where Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man was able to save Tom Holland's MJ, played by Zendaya, after he couldn't save Gwen. And his reaction to saving her, that's what this is about. That's what this is about. I don't give a fuck about the multiverse and these cheap meta jokes or the franchise referencing earlier entries in the same franchise. What I care about is moments like that. The moment that Andrew Garfield had with Zendaya. That's what this is about. And I just wish there was more of that in this movie, because there was genuine moments of heart and soul and emotion, but they were just too few and far between, because once again Marvel is just too focused on setting up the next big event and getting their ducks in a row very loudly instead of telling a self-sufficient story. And it sucks, because there is so much to like in this movie. The moment where Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man and Alfred Molina's Doc Ock reunited, are you kidding me? Was it very easy nostalgia bait? Yes, but I took it. I took it completely. That was a wonderful scene. And I just wish there was more of that throughout this movie. But instead, we got a lot of really awkward, flat, and soulless moments. But I will say this, almost every single person in this movie brought their A game. I've already said that Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire did a great job, but Willem Dafoe as Green Goblin, he slipped right back into this role. You wouldn't even guess that it's been 19 years since he played this character. He is so perfect for the role that it feels like he last played the Green Goblin maybe 2 years ago. And I would argue he might have even played him better in this movie than he did in the original Sam Raimi Spider-Man. That's how good Willem Dafoe is. He is absolutely magnetic. The camera loves him. Alfred Molina was great. He brought a sense of confusion, and the fact that Alfred Molina was able to mine what felt like a character arc from this script just really speaks to how talented of an actor he is. And the same goes for Marissa Tomei, who has really been given the shaft as Aunt May, quite frankly, in the previous MCU Spider-Man films, but here she's actually given something to work with, and she makes the most of it. She delivers one of the most emotional scenes in the movie, and I will say, Tom Holland, this is probably his best performance as Spider-Man, and it's because he's actually given a chance to be Spider-Man. He's able to stand on his own instead of being connected to Tony Stark or the Avengers or the MCU as a whole. He's actually able to be his own character, and Tom Holland's talent actually shines through because of it. What a surprise. You let this kid have real material to work with, and he delivers. but the movie as a whole just doesn't congeal enough for it to work for me. And that's unfortunate because I was very excited and I really wanted to like this movie. But it just didn't work for me as a whole. There was something about it that felt flat. And that's really disappointing because there's just a lot to like. As I said, Tobey Maguire being on screen was something I never thought would happen. This very movie is something I never thought would happen. The very concept of it is monumental, but it just feels undercut by everything the movie prioritized instead of character and emotion. Marvel once prioritized the characters, but it doesn't feel like they're doing that anymore. And that is really, really disappointing because this is a movie that really could have benefited from that approach. Spider-Man No Way Home has its faults. I have my issues with it, but it also has a lot of things going in its favor. And I think a lot of people are going to like the movie. So don't let my opinion deter you from watching the movie, because the fact is the majority of people are probably going to love this for what it is. And I am willing to take the good with the bad and kind of watch the movie as it is. And because of that, I will say this is easily the best of the Tom Holland Spider-Man movies. This is the best Spider-Man appearance in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But compared to the Sam Raimi trilogy, I still don't think it holds up at all compared to those movies. I don't think the characterization holds up. I don't think the direction holds up. And that was another one of the issues I had with this movie, is the direction was really uninspired. There was no real interesting framing or scene composition. The scenes, especially the action scene, there was no visceral punch to them whatsoever, and no interesting camera work. It's disappointing to see because it's clear that the filmmakers like the character of Spider-Man, but there just wasn't a lot of technical panache going on here, and I think that really could have helped this movie because of the concept, because of the spectacle. But it just feels like this movie relied too much on the spectacle without actually giving it any impressive visuals to heighten that spectacle. Seeing 3 Spider-Man should be enough. I have to imagine that was the thought process. And at times, it was enough for me. But seeing 3 Spider-Mans sometimes is not going to carry an entire movie. And because there was so much going on here, I wish we got to see more of Doc Ock. I wish we got more Green Goblin. I wish we got more Toby. I wish we got more Andrew. This movie just has too many things going against it for me to say it's anything special. Did I have fun during moments? Of course I did. And like I said, the majority of people are probably going to like this. So do not let my opinion deter you from this at all. If you watch Spider-Man No Way Home, let me know what you think. I would like to hear your thoughts. I'm really interested in hearing other people's opinions about this movie because, like I said, I know the majority are going to love it, but I have seen some people that agree with me. So it will be interesting to see what this movie does in terms of where it stands after a few years have passed. So we'll see how it goes, and this was the end of a very, very busy year for Marvel, and I'm walking away from it feeling disappointed, but that doesn't mean you have to. So thank you for watching, everybody. I hope you're all staying safe and healthy. Otherwise, I'll see you next time, and may your heart be your guiding key.